Support for Modern Love comes from Living Proof. How long can you go between washes? Keep your hair cleaner longer while washing less for beautiful, healthier hair. Use the code LOVE at livingproof.com for a free travel-size dry shampoo with your $20 order. We are the science. You are the living proof. And by the Showtime original series Masters of Sex. Join the swinging 70s with pioneer sex researchers, Dr. William Masters and Virginia Johnson. Masters of Sex premieres September 11th at 10 p.m. Download the Showtime app now and start your free trial.
From the New York Times and WBUR Boston, this is Modern Love. Stories of love, loss, and redemption. I'm your host, Meghna Chakrabarty. On the podcast, we've explored young love and old, but today we're landing right smack in the center, midlife. When writer Marcia DeSanctis hit 40 and settled into married life with 2 kids, she realized that the second half of her life had no roadmap. So now what? Oscar and Emmy-nominated actor Angela Bassett brings us Marcia's story. Angela's film work includes the Tina Turner biopic, What's Love Got to Do with It?, Malcolm X, and Akeelah and the Bee. Here's Angela Bassett reading Marcia DeSanctis' essay, What the Psychic Knew.
Years ago, panicked, on the cusp of 30, between jobs and wondering where life would take me, I consulted a psychic. I remember staring at the sea of green carpet in her home as she addressed the usual concerns. She told me to marry Mark, the man I was living with, that I would have a son and a daughter, and that my future with them would not be in New York City, contrary to what I had long assumed. Finally, I asked the question I really wanted answered. When will I die? That's not what I do, she said. So I can't say. You can't because you don't know or because it's bad? She tilted her head to one side. Can you tell me how, then? I see a severe blow to the head, she said, catching me squarely in the eyes. It will be sudden and you won't feel pain. That's a relief, I said. I was born with the death sentence, like every creature that walks the earth. But I instantly regretted having this expertise into how I would leave it. But here's what I can say about this life, she continued, referring presumably to the time before I would be killed by a foul ball at Fenway Park or a tree branch in the woods. Your purpose is love. As opposed to what? She shrugged. Power, money, great acclaim. Too bad, I said. We chatted for another minute until our time was up. I took the cassette from the recorder and stuffed it into my pocket and wrote her a check for $150. I admit that at times her insight had kept me uneasy company and on high alert. For example, I never drive behind a truck carting things that might slip off at high speed. A decade later, the psychic was 3 for 3. I lived with my husband Mark and my son and daughter away from New York City, but the part about my purpose being love had been sidelined, or so I thought. Once the power vacuum of middle age descended, sucking the youth from my body, my spirit, and my marriage, everything I had to give went to my children, and though I loved them and my husband utterly, the drudgery of the day-to-day made it seem as if not love, but coffee, my Toyota, and sheer logistics were what propelled me through life. At 45, I had a hip operation, and the following 8 weeks gave me a brief window into old age. The view was not good. My family soldiered through a long winter with me hobbling. We all needed to get away. So I booked a few days at a seaside room in Miami with one king-size bed. My kids, then 8 and 11, and I arrived to glorious Florida blue skies. That first day, the sun knocked the kids out early and they fell asleep on either side of me in the sprawling bed, their shoulders already browned up and still smelling of sunscreen. I had dropped 15 pounds after my operation, and since I wasn't too fleshy to begin with, the loss made me look more haggard than I felt. I tried to right my pajama bottoms that had twisted around me, and as I did, I became aware of something in my abdomen, a lump that obviously didn't belong there. It was firm and round as a new summer plum. The warmest calm fell over me, and I grabbed my children, who rustled as I pulled them close. Back home, the doctor sent me to the hospital immediately with a "good luck" delivered in the gravest of tones. There, I saw many of the same nurses who had cared for me 3 months before. They asked, what was I doing there? "I have a lump in my belly," I said. Lying on the gurney, stuck up with needles, I was wholly, entirely unafraid. My husband ran into the room, his face clouded with confusion. "If this is cancer, I'm toast," I said. "It's not cancer," he said. 4 doctors appeared at my bedside. "What's going on?" my husband asked. "Do you know what it is?" The youngest one sat too gently on the foot of my bed. "We haven't identified it yet, but we know the mass is in your liver. Can you just tell me if I have cancer?" I said. "I cannot tell you that you don't," he said. "We'll take more tests tomorrow. Please try to get some rest." "What is your sense?" I asked. He shook his head. I thought his face answered for him. When the doctors left, I began to rattle off instructions to Mark, as if dictating a grocery list. The transition team for when I died was to be headed by my friend Sarah. She understands the culture of our house, so she has to be very involved with the kids. "Will you stop it?" he said. "It's important that they still get the same birthday cakes," I said. "That lemon cake for Ray, Ava's vanilla with pink butter frosting. The Thanksgiving recipes, Nana Foley's stuffing. It's all about food, really, and Sarah gets this." "You're being crazy," Mark said, holding my hand. The mass inside me felt alive, as if its dark center contained the heartbeat in my slackened body. "You have to get married right away," I said. I would handpick my replacement, the woman who would be the new cornerstone of our home. "You know who I really like?" I asked. "Enough," he said. "If you're sick, you'll fight it." "Why am I not afraid?" I asked, fogging out with painkillers. I knew the answer. As with the psychic's prediction, what scared me most was not knowing how anything ever would unfold, from aging to anguish about my children, to possibly facing my husband's eventual illness or death. The mysteries of the second half of my life loomed ever closer, and it was terrifying. It was definitely a cop-out, but for the first time in years I felt as if I knew where I was going, and I could stop waiting for all manner of blunt instruments to crash through my windshield. I watched Mark's face through drugged eyes. He sat awake all night in our room as I drifted in and out of lucidity. Time had attempted to obscure, or at least to trivialize, our deep history. But somewhere in that haze, I sensed in him the antidote to my fear, not of death, but of life. I extended my arms at my sides, and they ached with a craving to hold my children, as I had done only days before in Florida. I imagined them sleeping, their little arms curled around nothing but air. At 5 a.m., Mark went out for coffee, and 4 hours later, they discovered that the clementine-sized mass cocooned in my liver was benign. The next morning, a laparoscope siphoned it from my body, and the surgeon stitched up the incisions. Mark and I arrived home, and the children, who had been staying at Sarah's, soon followed. They were still brown as biscuits from Miami. My little girl looked wary. She had seen me too fragile too often that winter. I wanted to tell them all, how sorry I was, because I knew that for those moments it wasn't courage, but cowardice that had given me no fear of dying. A week later, I blew the dust off a box. Inside, I found the tape labeled August 1990. My car had the only cassette player, so I went for a drive and waited for the echo of my younger voice, then the psychic's. She spoke of my future son and daughter. Then there was a strange silence after I pushed her to reveal how I would die. And at last, her finale, that love would be the driving force of my life. Isn't that kind of obvious? I asked. Is it? Wait until you ask yourself, now what? You'll see. She was right. I had seen.
Angela Bassett, reading Marcia DeSanctis' essay, What the Psychic Knew. It's been 4 years since the piece came out. How did the rest of Marcia's 40s shake out? We'll find out after the break.
Living Proof products make life easier. Just ask Sarah from Los Angeles.
Recently, I had to have surgery, and as a result, it was very hard for me to raise my arm and wash my hair. That's when I relied on the dry shampoo. Being able to at least have clean hair just really helped me stay sane. That Perfect Hair Day dry shampoo was huge for me.
Use the code LOVE for a free travel-size dry shampoo with your $20 order. livingproof.com.
We're back. It's Modern Love, the podcast. I'm Meghna Chakrabarty. And now a postscript from the editor of Modern Love for the New York Times, Daniel Jones, and the author of this week's essay, Marcia DeSanctis.
So many people seized on the fortune teller aspect of this story because most of the mail that I got, and even Dan Jones was getting, he seemed to say, everyone wants to know, who is this fortune teller? So we go to these psychics because fate is just too iffy. And I would say that nowhere is that more clear than at midlife. It was a dark time. I think that wishing that I would have a fatal illness rather than carrying on with the rest of my life is a pretty dark thing to admit, and I did.
The majority of essays I receive about midlife marriage express this sense of disappointment. And Marcia's essay to me really is one about profound questions. Those questions are, well, shouldn't I feel happier? Like, why isn't this enough? There's the kind of love that is just part of routines and part of being in a family and part of taking care of someone. But that doesn't feel like the fun, exciting kind of love. It feels like the sort of dutiful love. And what Marcia struggles with here is like she wants like so many people in midlife marriage, want something that's more passionate and more a feeling of being really alive. I'm fascinated by the power of psychic suggestion and how, at least in what I've seen, how often it tends to work, but why does it work? And it seems to me that it works because we open ourselves up to the possibility of that predicted thing happening. People are so desperate for some sort of clarity or some sort of suggestion or someone, just anyone, to point in some direction, and they'll willingly follow.
At that point, I was 45 years old. The next chapter, it was too much of a mystery, and I just wasn't sure if I'd have the energy to try to solve it. I think that's what happens in middle age. It's like the edge of a canyon or the edge of a desert or something, or where do I go from here?
Marcia decided to go back to school. After surviving her cancer scare, she quit her job as a television producer and enrolled in a grad program for international relations.
So while I was there, I was really detached from my life. And I had an episode where I guess I really fell hard for another man that wasn't my husband. We didn't have a physical affair, but I got through this, and we got through this. And what was amazing was that it was just interpreted, at least my husband interpreted it as something more worthy of his compassion than his contempt, and certainly not his casting me aside because I had been unfaithful. Divorce wasn't an option, and I don't know if that's wise or if that's simple. I don't know what that was, but it was just not something we were going to do. And so the writing of this story, it was really just the first tremor in what was a pretty turbulent midlife, which, by the way, isn't over, but the marriage is in a very, very good place. If you can make it through your 40s, I think you can make it through anything, and I think that goes for marriage.
Marcia's career is in a very good place as well. She's a travel writer now, and a couple of years ago, she published the New York Times bestseller 100 Places in France Every Woman Should Go. And Marcia's professional success helped rejuvenate her family life.
So my kids, I think it's exciting for them to see their mother working and being published and saying, well, this is okay because mom's happy and mom's fulfilled.
Marcia DeSanctis, author of What the Psychic Knew. We also heard from Modern Love editor Dan Jones. Special thanks to Angela Bassett for reading this week's essay. You can see her next month in Season 6 of FX's American Horror Story. Find out who's coming up next week on the podcast after the break.
Support for Modern Love comes from the Showtime critical hit series Masters of Sex. Acclaimed sex researchers Dr. William Masters and Virginia Johnson are the pioneers of the sexual revolution. But can they keep up with the swinging 70s? Catch a revealing look at their controversial work, scandalous romance, and groundbreaking discoveries on Masters of Sex, starring Michael Sheen and Lizzie Kaplan. New episodes Sundays at 10 p.m. Download the Showtime app now and start your free trial.
Join us next week when Tony and Emmy Award-winning actress Cherry Jones reads the story of a woman who fell in love with a convicted murderer.
A lot of people snickered behind my back about our marriage. After all, I came from a wealthy American suburb and was a graduate of a Seven Sisters school. He had grown up in a middle-class family. He was an athlete who took a wrong turn, a terrible turn.
Never miss an episode of Modern Love. Subscribe on iTunes or your favorite podcast app. And sign up to receive Modern Love email updates at nytimes.com/lovetalk. You can also join our Facebook community at facebook.com/modernlove. Modern Love is a production of the New York Times and WBUR, Boston's NPR station. It's produced, directed, and edited by Jessica Alpert, John Perotti, and Amory Sievertson. The idea for the Modern Love podcast was conceived by Lisa Tobin. Our casting consultant is Amy Lippens. Iris Adler is our executive producer. Daniel Jones is the editor of Modern Love for the New York Times and advisor to the show. Music for the podcast, courtesy of APM. I'm Meghna Chakrabarty. See you next week. If you've been obsessively following this election, you should check out a new podcast from our partners at the New York Times. It's called The Run-Up, and it features some of the best journalists at the New York Times to help make sense of this final stretch of the campaign. You can find new episodes every Tuesday and Friday on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts, or at nytimes.com/therunup. That's nytimes.com/therunup.